China has forced the US into a corner over TikTok. The US can only demand data, not the algorithm.金刻羽stated China has bargaining chips in negotiations with the US, unafraid of threats. China and the US have reached a framework agreement on the TikTok deal. American companies can acquire controlling shares of TikTok, China. In areas where persistence isn't necessary, the CCP still refuses to yield, protecting Chinese companies' intellectual property rights. Mainland Culture Bank of China magazine published an article by Lu Han, a Tsinghua University law professor, detailing the focus of TikTok negotiation disputes. Recently, the international technology war has increasingly intertwined with legal battles. In 2024, the U.S. Congress passed the Protecting Americans from Foreign Control Apps Act, prohibiting the distribution, maintenance, and updating of social platforms controlled by foreign adversaries in the U.S. unless completely divested from their foreign parent company. TikTok and some U.S. users immediately sued, arguing this bill violates the U.S. Constitution, especially the First Amendment's freedom of speech, and sought to block its implementation. On December 6 last year, the U.S. Supreme Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia ruled that some provisions of the Protecting Americans Act related to TikTok were not unconstitutional. TikTok then appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which heard the case unusually quickly and made today's ruling, the 17th. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled the Protect Americans Act doesn't violate the First Amendment because it doesn't directly ban TikTok but offers an option to operate without foreign government influence. A qualified divestiture method must comply with necessity, protecting national security while minimizing free speech impact. TikTok's U.S. legal rights are exhausted, the mandatory divestiture act remains. TikTok's fate rests solely with the U.S. government, Trump's decision. Trump, unwilling to shut down TikTok, repeatedly extended its grace period. Based on U.S. judicial findings, American readers will likely conclude an internet company effectively controlled by Chinese citizens collected data on American netizens and used TikTok's algorithms to push content, threatening U.S. national security. It's worth questioning why network data and algorithmic issues have become national security issues in the United States. U.S. laws and policies have evolved from cyber defense to digital sovereignty. From the Internet's social application in the 1990s to widespread smartphone popularity by 2020, U.S. cyber policy focused on protecting critical infrastructure from foreign attacks and promoting a global open Internet. After 2020, U.S. policy shifted to maintaining digital sovereignty, control over data, algorithms, and platforms. Security-related laws and policies are frequent. In 2020, the Trump administration attempted to ban TikTok and WeChat, citing national security threats due to foreign access to American user data. The Biden administration further strengthened digital sovereignty policy. In 2023, an executive order on AI and cybersecurity introduced strict controls on AI models and data access, particularly against foreign adversaries like China, deemed hostile by the U.S. That same year, the U.S. released its National Cybersecurity Strategy, emphasizing data security, technology supply chains, and AI regulation in national security. Technological competition in 5G, algorithms, data, and AI is now a core component of U.S. defense and intelligence strategies. Data security is a core element of U.S. national security. From a U.S. perspective, whether Chinese tech companies pose a threat is no longer just economic or technological competition, but a strategic confrontation. The TikTok-related American Security Act exemplifies this, marking the first time the U.S. passed legislation to compel a major digital platform to safeguard national security. This shows the U.S. seeks not only to oust control of TikTok's Chinese shareholders but also to fully acquire TikTok's algorithms and U.S. user data. From a Chinese perspective, TikTok's U.S. subsidiary is controlled by American citizens and shares in local economic benefits, making it a non-negotiable issue. If the U.S. insists on acquiring TikTok's algorithms, it implies any Chinese company doing business in the U.S. must surrender its entire technology stack, effectively giving up its intellectual property. The American version of TikTok could even compete globally. Protecting China's intellectual property is now the focal point of negotiations between China and the U.S. The fourth round of China-U.S. financial negotiations concluded, with both sides agreeing to resolve the TikTok dispute through entrusted data operations and algorithm licensing. This means the U.S. abandoned its demand to force TikTok's parent company to divest TikTok's U.S. business, instead accepting a tracking plan. The U.S. recognized operating entity will handle data hosting and content operation, while TikTok's parent company retains core algorithm ownership, using this technology via authorization. Entrusting data operation is like authorizing a third party, but platform ownership remains with TikTok. TikTok didn't give up final ownership of its U.S. business, only authorizing its U.S. region operation to a U.S.-controlled company. This model is like Disneyland's licensed operation. A foreign joint venture doesn't own Disney's intellectual property. It can be summarized. First, China forcing the U.S. to compromise in TikTok negotiations is significant. The U.S. controls American users but can't obtain the algorithm to protect Chinese companies' core intellectual property. Second, the U.S. violates national security by infinitely expanding its boundaries, even to plundering other countries' property. It will force China to seize and sell core assets. The U.S. used long-arm control to arrest French Alstom executives, ultimately forcing Alstom to sell their leading turbine business to competitor General Electric, making GE's turbine business the world's largest. TikTok has been so successful, penetrating the global market. If the U.S. social media giant is forced to hand over its performance algorithm to American rivals, it can do the same to TikTok. However, China is different. France saved Huawei last time, and this time it will save TikTok. Additionally, after the U.S. and China concluded the Madrid negotiations, Bloomberg interviewed金刻羽, author of the New China Handbook and a finance professor at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Bloomberg described金刻羽as one of the most outstanding experts helping foreigners understand China. The Bloomberg host asked her, "We're here trying to figure some things out, and we want to understand the relationship between China-US semiconductor and trade demands."金刻羽responded directly, saying that China is fighting back, and that China is in no hurry to reach any trade agreement. Of course, there is uncertainty. Both sides believe that escalating the conflict is pointless, but it's necessary to draw some red lines, such as imposing technical restrictions or bans. These are also very important for China. China's goal is to reduce uncertainty between the two countries and to ease tensions. The host followed up by asking, "What is the biggest misunderstanding the U.S. has about China?" When China spoke out, he didn't know if China was speaking to foreign media or its own people. Genkel responded that China believes it's in a strong position both domestically and internationally. Although the domestic economic situation is complex, China's attitude and flexibility are crucial for its negotiations with the United States. China has bargaining chips, like rare earths. China is telling the U.S., "Look, you understand, the United States needs China, and your supply chain cannot be disrupted anymore." He believes China and the U.S. are closely intertwined, so they should continue to move forward, but the path cannot affect China's domestic politics or state-owned enterprises. China believes this is absolutely not allowed. Pabo presided over the follow-up questioning. The latest corporate judgment news is that China said a preliminary investigation found NVIDIA violated antitrust law. Is this a Chinese negotiation strategy?金刻羽believes this is a broader policy tool or negotiation strategy. The US is also investigating China, but is its approach fair? Both sides may be somewhat unfair, and they are both trying to use these actions to advance negotiations. If you ask what balance China is trying to achieve, China will argue this isn't completely one-sided, and that China has a say. Bloomberg's support seems to dislike Trump. Yu asked, "You said China's strategy isn't confrontational, but it's difficult not to be confrontational when dealing with the Trump administration." Yu believes China has handled this very well and cautiously. They've been thinking about this issue for years, since the Trump 1.0 era, and are well prepared. This is a confident, measured, and well-thought-out attitude. He doesn't think negotiations between China and the US are heading the highest road. China wants to express to the US, look at room cooperation between China and the US. As for the Chinese economy, Yu believes China's economy is resilient. He specifically mentioned the AI large model DeepSeek, which many people who observe China from afar have been amazed. He said this is indeed just the beginning. There are all sorts of DeepSeek models, big and small, in different fields. Take robotics, for example. China's future path is to integrate deep services and innovation with manufacturing. So China is not just focused on exporting goods, but wants to incorporate all art and winking and laughing, knowledge, intellectual property, and high technology into the mix. This is a completely new model. What China truly pursues is thorough cost reduction and innovation, believing it can complement the US. Chinese innovation is not just about technological breakthroughs, but also about global diffusion and application. To sum up simply, tonight's main point is that China has bargaining chips and is in a position of advantage in negotiations with the US, unafraid of intimidation, and the future of China's economy.